Hello and welcome. In this tutorial we are going to see how to transform GraphQL types to TypeScript types and how we can use that in our React application thanks to the Apollo Codegen library. So first of all, what do we have here? I have an example here that uses a SpaceX API, SpaceX GraphQL API. It just gets that information basically from that server, and we display it on our website, right? So I reload it, you have a loading thing, and it displays something. And here we have an error because apparently the API returns a duplicate, and there's nothing I can really do with it because I don't own the API. So we have our React code here. Let me close it a bit. Again, it's very simple. Tailwind, CSS, Apollo config here that points to the SpaceX API, and a app.tsx component that has a render function that renders the loading thing that we have seen. We have a query that fetches the get launches, and we have some basic React logic that just shows the launch cards, right? And the launch card component is a simple component that accepts ID, mission name, and details. And we will add more stuff. And the get launches is in the GraphQL folder, queries.graphql.ts, and this is basically the query that I copy paste from the GraphQL website. So again, the code is available on GitHub in the link in the description below, so feel free to use it. And the problem we are trying to solve is that, well, here we see that once the data has been fetched, so if we check the network, we see that we have a data thing, and once it has been fetched, we want to do something with those launches. The problem is that we don't have autocompletion, TypeScript autocompletion on that data, so we don't know the shape of that data. One solution is to inject that kind of data into as generics, right? But the problem with that is, let's say we are developing a GraphQL server and we change something in the SDL, so GraphQL SDL, and then we need to update all our types in our React, and that's a lot of work. So what we want to do is that we want to import the what the query could take as variables automatically, right? And we want to import automatically the shape of the data that the query will retrieve. To do so, we have a tool called Apollo Codegen, right? So it is installed here in the dev dependency, and just make sure that you have Node.js version 16 and not 17, because it does not work with the latest 17 version. And so until it's fixed, we just have to wait, guys. And here I have a script. Let me zoom a bit more. So Apollo client gen target TypeScript, meaning we want to generate the TypeScript typings. It should include all the files that are ended by GraphQL.ts. So that's just me who named it that way. You can name it the way you want, and yeah, those just store the GQL tags, right? Oops, and it just and I just say to excludes the generated folder, right? The folder where the types from GraphQL to TypeScript will be generated, and make sure it's includes and not include, because if you press include, you will have an error. Let's go ahead and generate the types. So as soon as we will do it, and by the way, it will work because the URL, the endpoint, is defined here in the apollo.config.js. I think it's a nice way of doing so. So you can also pass the endpoint in the here command, but I think it's more dirty. So let's go ahead and do that, run that script. So yarn gen types, and it has just generated the types from that GraphQL API, right? And let's close that. We've seen that we have a global generated folder which is blank because the API does not export global kind of enums or fields. Everything is kind of contained in that API, which is good. And we see that in the GraphQL folder we now have a generated folder with get launches. One thing I want to point out is name the way I name kind of the queries. Here is camel tag, right? Camel case. And in my query, it's I forgot how it's called, but basically it's in snake case. I think it's called Pascal case. I name it that way. Why? Because well, the query is named like that, and you see that it has this name, right? The same name. So if we name our query with the same kind of get launches, you will have a conflict when you will try to import those, right? So that's why I use Pascal case for the variable that stores the GQL, and the camel case for the query itself. And of course that is the name how it's defined on the GraphQL server. And if we go here, we see that here we import GraphQL. Now we can inject the variables and the data. Well, here the variables we don't really need it, but we could inject it. So first of all, the first thing in the generics goes the data, the shape of the data that will be returned, and it's inside get launches, and it should be here get launches, right? So get launches, and it's going to be imported automatically from the generated, right? So that's why this variable should be different from this one. That's why I kind of chose the Pascal case. And there's also a thing called variables. Get launches. There are no variables actually, so that's fine. It does not take any variables into account. That's interesting. No, it does take some variables. So why? Oh yeah, of course we haven't defined them. We need to define the variables into the query. So if we define the variables into the query, they will be available as well. For now, let's just use it without the variables, and in a moment we're going to define the variables. So now GraphQL knows that the data will be of shape of that thing. So now if we go here and we do launch dot, of course we should not press it, it's any, don't, and we have all the kind of shape of the object. So we have launch.id, and it says that is possibly null, and we need to modify the TypeScript a bit so we don't have any errors. The SpaceX API is not a perfect example of a GraphQL API, so here we go. And let's try an example with the variables now. Also, by the way, I put the generate types as a pre-start hook. So every time we restart the application, which is here, it's going to regenerate the types, right? Da-da-da, and here we go. It's all done. Let's move it here. And one other thing, let's try an example with the variables. So let's test something where we have to use a variable. So maybe limit, right? We are going to use limit. So limit would be to 5. So 5. Get the 5 first, right? So it will get us the 5. And let's go ahead in our query and update it so we can have those variables integrated. We go into query and we say, well, limit. It's what is the type of that limit? It's an int, and it could be optional. So int, and here limit is limit, right? So now if we update the types, we can do it manually here. We update the types, yarn gen types, and we should have now the variable somewhere. Here. Now we have the variables here available, and we can use those in our query, which is quite cool. So get launches variables, right? And here we can do variables, and now we have that autocompletion. So TypeScript knows what kind of value we can provide. And yeah, that's basically what I wanted to show. It took me quite a while to make it work, because on the Apollo documentation they use Apollo Codegen, which does not work correctly. So the reason why I had the problem with that is that when I was looking in the documentation, Apollo was talking about the Codegen, but this feature is actually deprecated. So now it's not Apollo-Codegen, it's Apollo and Apollo CLI, they call it like that. And that's how basically you generate types. And yeah, I hope it helped you, and it saved you time, because I probably lost something like 1 day on that. See you in the next video.